This picture here, it is a very common transverse section of the midbrain. This little star shape, or this like little plus shape, I just made that terrible, but that little plus shape right there is the hole or the cerebral aqueduct. And that was the very, very small canal connecting the third and fourth ventricles, right? Remember, sometimes in growing children, this very narrow cerebral aqueduct becomes pinched, and it restricts the flow of the CSF from those choroid plexuses in the lateral ventricles down into the third and fourth ventricles to descend the spinal cord. In this case, CSF will build up in the brain. A neural shunt is an artificial support that basically holds open the cerebral aqueduct. And these shunts are very similar to the stents that are used to hold open arteries. These two big bulges coming off the dorsal side of the midbrain, which is the top of this picture right here. So these two big bulges coming off the dorsal side are only two of the four bulges that have this word called the colliculi. The top two bulges are the superior colliculus, and these two pictured right here are the bottom two, or the inferior colliculus. The superior colliculi, they're involved in tracking eye movements and objects in relation to your position. They also coordinate reflexive head movements in response to what you see. So the superior colliculi, they're pretty much hardwired to the optic nerve, cranial nerve 2, and they receive tons of visual information that they get to process. The inferior colliculi, they consolidate auditory input in the same way that the superior colliculi consolidate visual, right? So the inferior colliculi, they're capable of determining where a sound was made in relationship to your position. Both of these functions result in eye movements and neck movements. Sports like baseball and pastimes like listening to different forms of music can stimulate these areas in a growing child and also in an adult. And this is why sports such as t-ball and soccer can really help these areas. But this is also why listening to different types of music can help develop these areas as well. The red nucleus is this gray matter bundle that's it's kind of on either side of the crotch in the midbrain, which is the crotch is the interior median fissure. But these two areas right here are the red nuclei, and they're really involved with the motor control of the hands. The red nuclei, they collaborate with the cerebellum and the basal nuclei to give you really fine motor control. These swaths right here are called the substantia nigra. And the substantia nigra, their function is to make dopamine. When it makes dopamine correctly, it produces melanin as a byproduct. So the substantia nigra on someone who doesn't have Parkinson's should be nice and dark with this neuromelanin, right? But on the other side, on this side, I have pictured the substantia nigra of what it would look like for somebody with Parkinson's. Parkinson's at the root is the inability to create more dopamine. So a patient with Parkinson's would have a very lightly colored substantia nigra. Now, when everything's functioning correctly, dopamine's made in your substantia nigra. It's used by the red nucleus. It's used by your basal nuclei. It's used by your thalamus. It's used by a whole bunch of different structures to inhibit unnecessary movements. Think about that. An unnecessary movement is a tremor. And so when the midbrain's working correctly, the tremors aren't present. If you don't have tremors, your substantia nigra is probably okay. If you do have tremors, that doesn't mean you have Parkinson's. But with Parkinson's, the reduced ability to create dopamine for the basal nuclei, it basically results in these tremors, usually in the hands and feet on one side of the body, unilateral, but then it starts to affect motor control bilaterally as both substantia nigra start to really ramp down in their production of dopamine. Regarding these two tabs that are coming off each side of the midbrain right here, these are what are called the cerebral peduncles, right? Cerebral peduncles should not be confused with cerebellar peduncles that came off the pons. Cerebral peduncles physically support the big brain hat, the cerebrum. The peduncles, they're made up of myelinated axons of more than a few tracks. Descending, ascending, you take your pick, man. There's tons of them running through there. So mostly what is running through these peduncles are myelinated axons, but there are some non-myelinated because there's just so many in there. Most of them are upper motor neurons of descending pathways, right? So they would be these green neurons over in the picture there. One example is that axons of the corticospinal tract and the reticulospinal tract, they carry information from your primary motor cortex all the way down the spinal cord and then out to the appropriate level of output for skeletal muscle. These axons, they pass through these cerebellar peduncles. And again, that's just one example, and it's an example of a motor pathway. There are ascending, and there's just so many different pathways that are funneled through these peduncles.